Karen gets burned. This is a burner account. Tried posting on Pro, but my burner account doesn't have enough karma. Skeptical names and places have been changed to protect the innocent and the not so innocent. Some years ago I started working for a heavy industrial manufacturing company. I lucked out and got a great supervisor for a boss, Joe. The work was hard, working 12-hour days for 13 days in a row and then a Sunday off, then back for another 13 days. I was young and didn't mind. It helped my wife and I save up for a house. After about 6 months, Joe noticed I was picking up on the work pretty fast and promoted me to a group leader position. This came with a raise and increased responsibility that most other workers didn't want. Joe would put me in troubled groups in his department and I would work on general improvements and figuring out the issues. This was a union shop and the mentality was to just put in your hours. Don't work harder or smarter, just do your time and don't kill the job was the unspoken motto. After a few years, Joe was promoted a major and he transferred me with him to his departments. While I wasn't a supervisor yet, I was the supervisor in all but name. The supervisors loved it because they never had to leave the office and I liked it because it was a good learning experience. I made a good reputation and got a lot of respect from workers and from management. Eventually Joe's areas were doing so well he was promoted to plant manager. As before, he wanted to promote me with him, this time to a supervisor spot. We talked in length because the only supervisor spot open was working for Karen. Karen was female, a minority, and a member of the LGBTQ community. She was the poster child on the company website of the inclusiveness in the workplace. Literally her face was the one they used. She was also a freshly minted manager and Joe was not confident in her abilities, but me, being the plucky go-getter with a can-do attitude, decided to take the position. I had to interview with Karen and got to meet some of her supervisors. They were very quiet and reserved. Once I was promoted, I worked in tandem with another supervisor, Chris. Chris was young, had one small child and his wife was pregnant and a stay-at-home mom. During the first week everything was going well. I was learning all the employees, getting to know the process, and getting my feeling for the area. During the second week, Chris's wife went into labor and she had a hard time. Chris went on paternity leave for 6 weeks and I was tossed into the deep end in charge of the whole area solo, with 60 employees. I was barely treading water, but I was doing my best. When I would ask Karen for guidance or assistance, she would scoff like it was beneath her and tell me, if I have to do your job then I don't need you. And quat. So I gritted my teeth and worked my tail off. My wife got me a smart watch and I was averaging 25,000 steps a day trying to keep everything running. We were holding our own and employees all did what they could to help, as the satiation was not ideal for everyone. A few weeks in, I was reviewing some quality documents and I noticed that one of the quality gates was not being followed. I emailed the info to the quality engineers and they lost their minds. This was a 4-hour operation on a 20-hour part that we were skipping entirely. Turns out one of the reasons Karen got promoted was because she was running her department so efficiently. Then it came to light that she made the decision to skip this quality process, saving that 20% of time. Except the engineers never signed off on this and it caused massive damage control. The process had to be reinstated and the parts that were never checked had to have warranty extensions. This caused the company to have egg on their face and Karen to look bad. During this time, Karen also became more vindictive. She would openly tell people she would never be fired and could do what she wanted. She would walk the departments and if she didn't like someone she would make the supervisors write them up by the end of the day. She wanted us to find a reason and if we didn't she would take it out on the supervisors. For example, forcing the supervisors to stay late to do inventory or something else menial just because she could. She would not let the supervisors make any decisions until she approved, so something like overtime had to wait for her approval and she would not respond until the end of the day, causing the deps to scramble. Then if there weren't enough overtime employees to do the work, she would blame it on the supervisors. While the supervisors knew this wasn't right, we all needed our job and tried to do the best we could for Karen and the employees. We were mainly rodeo clowns to Karen being the bull. The first day Chris was back, him and I were both pulled into Karen's office. She started berating me on how poor of a job I was doing, making her look bad, and how I never came to her for help. This made me speechless because of the previous comments she made and the fact that supervisor work was beneath her. After the meeting I was still a bit stunned, but I put it together that she was about to railroad me out of the company and this was the first step. I called Joe and asked for a meeting that same day. When I got together with Joe, I started telling him about the things that were going on that he had no idea: the harassment, the abuse, the vindictive nature. Ironically, while I was speaking with him, another supervisor called him to complain about Karen as well with the same grievances. Joe was stunned and said he would speak with Karen, but he gave me carte blanche on any open spot in the company starting next day. He really didn't want to lose me. I did a lateral transfer to a different department doing engineering/IT work and I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks later I was leaving work and Karen mentioned that I never turned in my laptop and phone to her. I told her I didn't know I had to, but that I could give it to her tomorrow. She smirked and said she would get it back soon enough. I didn't think too much of it at the time. After about 6 months I had my review with my new boss Jake. The review went great. He was very happy with my work, and was a bit surprised at how fast I picked up things. At the end of the meeting, Jake mentioned offhand how Karen tried to intervene in the review and get me fired, but Joe stepped in and squashed it. Okay Karen, now you pissed me off. After I left Karen's department, the turnover rate went through the roof. The supervisors were quitting at a rate of 1 every 3 months. Keep in mind that this is a legacy company that had multi-generations working. Fathers, mothers, sons, entire families. Some areas had 3 generations working side by side, and yet Karen was rolling over employees and supervisors like a steamroller. Working for her became the kiss of death. I casually mentioned to Joe about the turnover and he told me he couldn't figure out what was going on. People were quitting without notice and no one was doing exit interviews. I told Joe that Karen was writing people up to force them out. When they would hand her the resignation letter or 2 weeks notice, she would tell them to leave immediately and throw away the letter. Then she would tell HR that the person quit on the spot and that was the end of it. Joe told me that because of who she was and how high she was, the company wouldn't do anything to her until they had an airtight case, so went to work. I took the supervisors working for Karen out drinking after work a few times a week and made sure I had my hand on the pulse. If someone was quitting, I made sure they emailed their letter of resignation to Karen and CC'd Joe and HR, stayed for their exit interview, and that they called the company integrity hotline for good measure. Things were progressing well and I had all the supervisors on board except Chris. Chris really needed the job and Karen was not writing him up. Through a stroke of luck I found out Karen was low-balling his raises as a cost-saving measure. That's why she was not harassing him. When I told Chris, he was furious and wanted to quit on the spot. I encouraged him to speak with Joe before he leaves. Joe and Chris had a very productive meeting and Chris decided to stay. Now all the supervisors were on board. Joe brought in an HR bigwig from the headquarters in Kansas, and over the course of a week each supervisor was sent in for an interview discreetly without Karen knowing. By the time the interviews were over, they had emails, texts, eyewitnesses and a mountain of evidence. Despite everything, the company wanted to keep this quiet, so they brought in Karen and said they no longer needed her and offered a very generous severance package. Karen, being Karen, lost it on the HR people. She threatened to sue for discrimination and even called a lawyer. That's when the company pulled out the stack of evidence and rescinded the severance offer. After a few months, Karen found a new job as a plant manager in a different factory and I found out where. I casually mentioned to the union reps at my factory where Karen was working and suggested that maybe they should give the union at the other factory a call. She was fired within 3 months for employee harassment. Last I heard, she had to sell her house and move out of state to find a job. One DoD company I worked at, a bigwig cut out a test to save money. The lifespan for the satellite dropped by a significant amount because now it can't stay in its orbit as long as intended. It also took longer to get there for same. You can't hide that. It's physics linked back to this guy telling people don't check that with the military as the customer. My guess is that they didn't think that was enough to get rid of her, because they would have to prove that she did it intentionally to damage the company and not just as a mistake because she wasn't properly trained. Otherwise she theoretically could have sued claiming that they didn't train her properly and then were unfairly punishing her for not being trained. Even if she lost, it would be bad publicity for the company and yet more money wasted. Stupid, yes, but that's how the American legal system works. Dude, I have to work with a supervisor like this. Thank God they aren't my boss, and they only hire contract workers for them. The supervisor can't do basic job functions, like I have to hold their hand and tell them exactly how to get the info I need from their system. I come to find out, the idiot was sending my shit to the director to get me in trouble. I nipped that in the bud with this one issue, but now I just avoid them and work around them. But I'm in the process of leaving the company. You can be one of these 3 things, asshole/rude, arrogant, idiot. If you got 2 of them, I don't put up with your dumbass shit. Some people are just miserable cunts who get off on making other people's lives difficult. How they justify their own behavior to themselves is beyond me. I had a boss like that at a food process factory. I had a very specific job, which I did well after my boss quit. By myself, getting done the work of 2 people now. I asked for a raise. He gave me one. But now he started entering the work area without my knowledge and adjusting something, change a setting, disconnect a pipe, turn a cooler off, then yell at me when the job inevitably turned to shit. I smashed his car with a forklift, then walked out, in the middle of the day. I just don't get paid enough to put up with people like that. Some of the people had worked in that company for many years and the turnover was insane. People just started walking out. There was one guy who only spoke Italian. He had started work there 25 years ago because everyone spoke Italian. So he never had to learn English. He left too. Nobody could stand that guy. Just the most rude, abrasive, irrational person I'd ever met. And he was in charge. So the turnover was ridiculous. Good on you for getting rid of her. It's really hard to get rid of people in authority at large companies sometimes. I've met a few people over the years who think that their membership of some minority groups gives them a license to be an asshole. It's not fun. I strongly support the protections afforded to people based on their sexuality, ethnicity, etc. So the small subset of people who abuse it really piss me off. I've also met a number of people who are completely convinced that anyone who dislikes them does so because they are bigoted. Don't like me? It's because I'm gay and you're a homophobe. Well, no. It's because you're really fucking annoying. Take over conversations to drone on about your tedious job. Talk over people, appear to have no empathy, and are actually a racist prick too. If you think this makes me bigoted, that's unfortunate. I won't pull the sum of my best friends or ex card because it's kind of irrelevant if they are or not. It's not something that affects me after all, except for some sympathy about how life can be harder and less fair. Much like men shouldn't have to frame women as someone's mother/daughter/sister/wife to care about them. I don't care because of friends, I care about their issues because they're people and it matters. And one of the things I care about is assholes abusing the protections our society is trying to build for people who can be vulnerable in some situations. I have all respect for minorities and for members of the LGBTQ+ community. I'll work with them all day long. It's when they go the route of saying, I don't have to actually do the work, because I'm a protected species, that it gets my back up. It's very few and far between, and generally self-correcting, but seriously, we're actually trying to do the damn job here. I recall working alongside one lady. She was a woman in a generally, but not totally, male-dominated field, and she was a minority, so she apparently felt as though she could skate straight past anything that looked like actual work. She also lived 2 minutes, walking distance, from where we were working. I lived 10 minutes away by car. I was always about 10 to 15 minutes early. She was consistently 10 minutes late. Once, she admitted to starting breakfast at about the time she should have been on site, starting her shift. On one occasion, we needed someone to escort some workmen through a sensitive area upstairs, a task that was more boring than anything. Follow them into this room, make sure they didn't touch anything they shouldn't, unlock door into next room, rinse and repeat. I offered to do it, but the supervisor told me to get this woman and send her upstairs instead. She hadn't done it before, the workmen knew where they were going. It was a semi-regular thing, and he wanted everyone knowing how to do everything. She flat out argued with me until I told her, look, go and talk to him. And quat. Then she went and argued with the supervisor. Where we were it was pretty quiet and she wanted to continue gossiping with the other guys. You or him can do it. You know how it's done. And quat. He put his foot down, sent her upstairs, then called up his higher-ups and put in a complaint about her. She was gone by the end of the week. Wow, it took a lot to get them to act. We have a trans employee at my current workplace, and while I absolutely support the trans movement, she is a terrible employee. She's a material handler, but sits in the break room for hours. Then she'll go out and load up lines at the last possible moment, which leaves those operators scrambling to get things set up, so the line doesn't stop. It was bad enough once that a line did shut down, which means it shuts down for 16 hours because of the way it's set up, and she didn't get written up or a warning or anything. Management is too scared to do anything even though they just have to follow the normal procedures for documenting poor performance and get their ducks in a row, but they won't even risk it and she knows she can get away with it. It's people like her that make it harder for people who really are being discriminated against to be taken seriously when they come forward. The if I have to do your job then I don't need you. And quat. Brought back some bad memories. I was a postdoc at a certain center with about 80 employees. The only other postdoc in the place was the boss's wife. They hired a high-level technician to help her, do her work for her, then they hired a second high-level technician for her. My projects had progressed to the point where I could use some help, which I asked for. My boss, let's call him Marco, told me a smellcats, if I hire someone to help you then I don't need you. And quat. Find a way to anonymously contact her and tell her that she is only to work at MCD's or another minimum wage job of your choosing. If she is offered a promotion, ever, she is to decline. If she is offered a raise, she is to decline or tell her superiors she will leave if she is brought above minimum wage. You'll be checking. Until then, every single job she ever obtains, you will do everything in your power to let them know of her history as a shitty employee and have her removed from any position making above minimum wage. Once she works an amount of time of your choosing and has been appropriately humbled, she will have passed your version of probation and she may begin to apply for normal jobs, with the warning that if she reverts to her vindictive, asshole self, that this probationary period will repeat and you will go back to getting her fired from any jobs making above minimum wage until she repeats the entire process.